All right, it's 6 o'clock, so we can get started. Welcome to week 4 of Whole Farm Planning and also happy Indigenous Peoples Day. If you'd like Spanish interpretation, find the world symbol below and select Spanish. And my name is Claire Menard. I'm your facilitator this week, and I wasn't here the first week to introduce myself. So I work out on the Kitsap Peninsula, and I'm based out of Bremerton. And I also serve Clallam and Jefferson counties through the WSU Regional Small Farms program. And I have 6 years of farming experience, which includes mixed vegetable production and livestock production, as well as 4 years of experience using draft horsepower. And back when I farmed, I took whole farm planning. So I'm really happy to be here and share and learn with all of you. So today's subject is integrated pest management, also known as IPM. And a pest can be a plant like a weed, a fungus, or a virus, an animal like a vole or an insect. And pests are something every farmer is going to deal with no matter how they farm. So whether you're conventional, organic, no-till, permaculture, all of these farms deal with different kinds of pests. And so tonight we're going to look at management tools such as crop rotation, methods of combating pests, prevention, and examples of what actually works on the farm. And joining us tonight, we have Laurel Moulton from WSU. She'll be our resource provider speaker. And our farmer speaker tonight is Shay Homan from Finn River. And both of our speakers tonight come from the Olympic Peninsula. So that's pretty exciting. And to start off the class tonight, we're going to do the resource spotlight. And tonight it's WSU's Plant Pest Insect Diagnostic Clinic. So I'm going to share my screen. All right. Hopefully you can all see that. So yeah, like I said, this is a program through WSU, and they have 2 clinics in Puyallup and in Pullman. And so whether you're on the west side or east side, that will determine where you send your specimens to. So the way you use this is, I'm going to use an example that I used on one of the farms that I worked at. We used the plant pest diagnostic clinic for this. We had strawberry plants that were mysteriously dying. And so to send a sample, we dug up several of the plants and we made sure to dig and not pull the plants because you don't want to remove the diseased roots of the plant. And you're going to send the entire thing, and that includes the roots, the soil, the attached tops, meaning the plant itself. And you'll want to send the plants at various stages. So a healthy plant or an undiseased plant, and then a plant showing early stages of the disease, and then a heavily affected plant. And I read that it's better to send too much of a specimen than too little. And you're going to mail that along with this form right here. And in this form, you're going to answer questions such as like, when was the problem first noticed? Is it spreading and how fast? How many plants are affected? The type of plant, the age, condition of surrounding plants, the site descriptions such as drainage, exposure, what kind of weather you've been experiencing, what kind of irrigation the crop gets, and then pesticide and fertilizer use, which includes type, rate, and the date that those things were applied. And then you can also use the diagnostic clinic, can go back here. You can submit samples for virus testing, and they have different types of viruses listed. And that's just kind of to determine, oh, this plant is dying. I think it might be this. You can send it in and they can test for that specific virus. And then this is pretty cool. You can also do insect identification. And so you might notice a mysterious bug. You might try to identify it using the internet. Nothing's coming up. You can't figure out what it is. you can use the diagnostic clinic to, you can get their help to identify that insect. So you'll see here what you have to do. You have to get 3 to 5 intact insects to trap. You'll trap them and then freeze them overnight. And then you'll pack them this way. And if you're bringing them into the physical clinic, like walking it in, you can also kill them in alcohol, but you can't mail alcohol. And then either way you do it, you're going to include this form as well. And yeah, the diagnostic clinic is a great resource for identifying what the heck is going on your farm, what is killing your plants. So we encourage you to use that. And it's a great tool in your IPM tool belt. All right. So our first speaker tonight is Laurel Moulton. She's the Master Gardener Coordinator in Clallam County, and she is also the Regional Small Farm Integrated Pest Management Specialist. So that means she serves not only Clallam County, but Jefferson and Kitsap County as well. So I'll let you take it away, Laurel.
Thanks so much, Claire. I'm just going to share my screen here. All right. And thank you, Claire, by the way, for that introduction to the plant clinic. I hope you guys are taking notes on that because it's a really great resource. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, give some examples, and then hopefully we'll have time for some questions. This presentation mostly focuses on vegetable and, well, plants, I should say. But I just wanted to make sure you know that integrated pest management is kind of a set of tools that can be used for in animal agriculture and otherwise. So just keep that in mind. Okay, first we'll talk about what is IPM. There are 6 principles in the process of using IPM. There's categories of management tools that you'll choose from, and then we'll talk a little bit about IPM applied. After this presentation, you should be able to basically understand what IPM is and how it can increase sustainability on your farm, no matter what your farming methods are. You'll know the 6 steps to use and understand the different categories of management tools. To start off with, integrated pest management is an ecosystem-based strategy that focuses on long-term prevention of pests or their damage through a combination of techniques. So you start with this process before you do anything, because prevention is really the biggest part of integrated pest management. Pest control methods are selected and applied in a manner that minimizes the risks to you, your customers, your family, non-target organisms, and the environment. And if you make the decision to use pesticides, you'll use them only after monitoring indicates that they're needed, and hopefully you'll select one that has the lowest risk. Here's the definition of pests. Basically, they're anything that causes damage or interferes with a desirable plant, animal, etc. So keep that in mind. What is your pest may not be a pest to somebody else. The big thing there's lots of big things about IPM that I like to get across, but really it acknowledges that there's no silver bullet. This is not a process where you're like, oh, I have this insect problem. What's the one tool that I need to get rid of it? It's not easy. It takes many different methods. You want to make sure you're educated, and it takes a little bit of work and understanding your system. I don't know if you guys have seen this picture before or something like it, but this is an orchard in China where pesticides were overused, and in doing so, they killed their pollinators. So these folks are up in the trees doing the work of pollinators that would have been free to you. A more local example was I worked with a farm recently who was using neem to try to manage powdery mildew in their high tunnels. And they didn't realize that neem was also a pesticide. So they killed off all their beneficial insects in their high tunnels as well, and ended up with powdery mildew and a really bad problem with spider mites. So anyway, anytime we kill the good guys, you guys end up doing the work for them. So just keep that in mind. The 6 parts of an integrated pest management plan include having a positive identification of the pest or the disease, monitoring the pest population to understand if it's a problem or not. One insect or several insects doesn't mean it's a problem yet. You need to develop thresholds and employ a combination of management tools. And then you need to use those tools at the life stage where they're most effective. And then you need to assess how things went and start the process over again. So here that is in a flow chart. Integrated pest management should just be a regular process in your farming life. Diagnosing the problems, monitoring is essential, assessing the damage, setting thresholds, selecting your management tools, understanding the timing, implementing, and then reevaluating and starting over. So the first step is identification. You have to know what the problem is before you can figure out the most effective strategy to deal with it. Was it caused by a pest, a disease, or something else? A few weeks ago, somebody came into my office and brought their cucumbers, and they said, "There's some type of insect putting holes in my cucumbers. What is it?" And it turned out it wasn't an insect at all. It was actually a disease called cucumber scab. That if you look it up, the spots that or the scabs that are caused look an awful lot like holes. So you really need to figure out exactly what it is, because managing a pest versus a fungal disease is quite different. You need to okay, as I said, yeah, learning the pest and the disease allows you to learn about the life cycle. As with any organism, there are more vulnerable parts to their life cycle than others. So understanding what the pest is will give you that information. And it allows you to understand the conditions that favor the pest or the disease. And up in the corner, you see the disease triangle. It could also be the pest triangle, but I want to go into this in a little bit more detail because it's a really kind of cool depiction of pest management. Basically, inside of the triangle is the amount of disease. In order to have a disease, you have to have a host that's susceptible to the disease. You have to have the pathogen present, and you have to have the right environment for that pathogen to survive. If you can alter any one of those 3, it reduces the area inside the triangle. So if you do something that creates an environment that's less palatable to the pathogen, then there'll be less of the disease. If you get rid of some of the pest or the pathogen, that reduces the area inside the triangle, so there's less disease. If you completely get rid of the environmental condition that allows the pathogen to survive, then you get rid of the disease because it has to have the right environment along with the host and the pathogen. Unfortunately, in some cases, the only answer is getting rid of the host. So tools for identification. Claire mentioned that picture is Jenny Glass. She's a diagnostician in the WSU plant clinic in Puyallup. She's amazing. I highly recommend using her services. But anyway, you can also go to your local extension office. If you're in Kitsap, Clallam, or Jefferson counties, you can call me. I'm happy to come out to your farm and take a look. And if I don't know, then I send it to Jenny. So it's kind of you can't lose. We want to get you taken care of, so we'll get you to the right resource. You also might want to ask another farmer, because if you have a problem, somebody else probably has that problem too. I put HortSense down there with an asterisk by it. That is actually a resource that's created for home gardeners, but I'll show you why it can be useful. For vertebrate pests, the best resource I found is the Snohomish County Extension website. They have a whole section of vertebrate pest management links. So rodents, birds, things like that. For weeds, there's all sorts of great books and apps online. I guess I'm aging myself. I still go to books, but there's apps there too. You can also go to your noxious weed control board. You might think that they're only for the really bad noxious weeds, but no, they are folks that know plants and know weeds very well. And so they can be a really good resource for identifying weeds that you're struggling with. Um, okay. Oh, and I just, while I mentioned Jenny, I just wanted to add to what Claire said, that if you send a sample to the plant clinic, make sure, I think it says this on the website, but make sure you mail it like on a Monday or like on a Friday, because Jenny wants the sample as fresh as possible. So you don't want to stick it in the mail on a Thursday and then it's in transit for a couple of days and then it sits over the whole weekend. Make sure you mail it when there's time to get it to the lab as quick as possible. And also, the reason for sending multiple different samples is don't wait till your plant is dead and rotting to send it, because oftentimes there's other pathogens that get in that have nothing to do with the disease at all. They're just secondary pathogens that are helping the plant break down. So send fresh samples and you'll get a lot better results. Okay, so here's HortSense. Again, this is a resource that was made for gardeners, but I like it because it's the only resource I found, at least with the WSU resources, where you can go and say, oh, I have a problem on an apple. So you click on tree fruit and then you click on apple, and then it gives you a list of all the pests and diseases that are known to be around Washington State. And you can click on those and look at pictures. So if that's the state where you are, where you don't even know where to start, this is a good resource to start with. Of course, you can always go to the extension office, call me, go to Jenny, but this is a resource accessible online. Okay, so now you've got the pest identified. You need to monitor it, determine when it's present, determine when the specific life stage is present, because that could be important information for when you're going to manage it, and determine indicators of when a threshold may be reached. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And then, of course, monitoring, that comes later too. You need to make sure that what you did worked, or see if it did work and how well it worked, and if that satisfies you. And if it doesn't, then you decide to do something different. For the most important monitoring tool is your eyes. You and your farm workers are going to be out in the field all the time. And so if you see something that looks new to you, that looks unusual, it might be a little bit alarming, or you're just like, that just doesn't seem right. That is, yeah, say something, don't ignore it. So your two eyes and being out in the field are very important. But there's also other monitoring tools, like traps, weather stations and modeling, etc. So here's some examples. There's sticky cards. And my slide is a little bit messed up, but anyway, there's certain pests that are attracted to yellow, and they can get stuck on sticky cards. These are really common in greenhouses. There's a picture of a fungus gnat there in the upper right-hand corner. Down here, this is a spotted winged Drosophila, which I'll talk more about later. For sticky cards, you may need to use them in combination with some type of lure. So this one is used with vinegar. There's different colors of sticky cards because different insects are attracted to different colors. Just a caution is blue is something that's very attractive to native bees. There's other colors of traps like red spheres that attract codling moth, or not codling moth, apple maggot. They can also be used with pheromones, things like that. The placement of the trap is really important depending on what you're trying to catch. So with fungus gnats, you would want to lay these traps parallel with the soil surface. And you can read about that since you've identified your pest. Out in the field, in addition to your eyes, you can use an insect net, and you can just walk down the row and sweep and see what ends up in your net. If you've got a big farm and lots of money, you can use a bug vacuum, but maybe those are only available for research. I don't know. There's something called a beat sheet. It's a fancy way of saying shake your tree and put a sheet under it and see what falls out of the tree. But you can buy a beat sheet. But anyway, this is good for shrubs or trees. You can monitor ground dwelling insects, but usually these are beneficial. So this is kind of just for fun to see if you've got ground beetles and other fun things in your soil. So, so once you've identified and monitored to see what is there and how much, you need to set your thresholds for damage. There are published action thresholds. They're established by the vegetable processing industry or for commodity crops. So for in most cases, these won't apply to you. In your case, they'll be farmer determined based on your values and your experience. What type of damage are your customers willing to take? And you can figure out what level of pest damage you can tolerate. So these photos are sweet potatoes that have wireworm damage. The ones on the right have a lot more holes in them, but the interesting thing is these holes, even though they're not pretty, they typically don't cause the sweet potatoes to rot. Your customers just may not like them anyway. Okay, then you have to choose a combination of tools to use. And then the categories include cultural practices, biological, mechanical, and chemical. So essentially, in integrated pest management, you really want to start with the passive management tools that are less work for you. So employing cultural and biological techniques. And then you want to use, in combination with that, use active management techniques when you need them. So that's typically manual labor or chemical controls. So for figuring out what the different management tools are for you, there's some great resources. The Pacific Northwest Handbook in HortSense, which I mentioned before. The Pacific Northwest Handbook is a resource that was specifically made for farmers. It's updated every year. It's a set of 3 handbooks. So there's the insect management handbook, the disease management handbook, and the weed management handbook. They were originally developed for pesticides, or they're updated every year because pesticides change. But they're wonderful tools that are organized with IPM principles. HortSense is as well. So they give you a pest description. They often have pictures of the crop damage. They give you the pest biology and life history, and then they outline all the cultural and all the management tools that can be employed and are successful in our area in the Pacific Northwest. You should note in the Pacific Northwest Handbook, in the chemical section, they're oftentimes labeled. Sometimes there's a home use section and a commercial use section. Sometimes they're just labeled with a little H or for home use and an O for organic. So anyway, they're resources that can be used for conventional, organic, whatever your growing methods are. And then university extension publications may go into more depth. For example, there's a whole publication on organic management of flea beetles or organic management of wireworms. And they're not, all the publications aren't specifically organic. Those are just two examples. So cultural control, the one that you want to start with, and includes a bunch of different things like site selection and preparation. Are you choosing a site that has a high water table for a crop that you know is susceptible to root rot? Don't choose that site. Timing the planting and the harvest, there are certain pests that you can completely avoid or mostly avoid by planting a little bit later. You might miss out on the early season crop, but it could be worth it depending on how the pest pressure is. or there's certain things that you can harvest earlier, like choosing potato varieties that are early season so they aren't in the ground long enough to sustain a lot of damage from soil dwelling pests. Um, I should have put pest-free materials at the top of the list because this one I can't emphasize more. Anything you bring onto your farm has the potential to bring pests with it. And I don't want to be alarmist, but an ounce of prevention it's worth so much. So think about if you're importing compost, if you're importing manure, how have those been treated? Have they been composted at high enough temperatures to kill weed seeds or pathogens that might be in those materials? Are you importing vegetable starts? Are you buying fruit trees? Are they coming from a source that oftentimes for fruit trees or berries or things like that, you can actually purchase from companies that say they're certified disease free, and it's really worth going for those. Pest-free materials. Also, this includes shared equipment. Think about if you're sharing equipment with other farms, you should know what types of diseases or pests or any problems they have on that farm, because there's certain diseases that if you get them, they're really hard to get rid of. And so you're better off not sharing tools with a farm that has those problems that you don't want. Cultural control includes stress reduction. So basically just treating your plants right. Preparing the soil well, taking care of the soil, using enough fertilizer, not using too much fertilizer, watering when the plants need it, things like that. So just keeping your plants happy. And then, of course, there's crop rotation, pasture rotation, just to make sure you aren't letting things build up by planting the same thing or running the same animals on the same ground all the time. There's trap cropping methods, which includes planting a crop that's more attractive to a pest that you're having trouble with. And those pests will go to that crop preferentially. And then you can either destroy the crop or spray insecticide on that crop to save your cash crop. There's habitat manipulation. So for example, one cool example an onion specialist at WSU gave was if you have downy mildew in your onions, if it's not too late, orient your crop rows with the wind. So you get lots of airflow down the rows and avoid windbreaks um, because that not having good enough circulation in your crop allows the conditions to develop that support, downy mildew to develop or other fungal diseases. Okay, let's see. And sanitization. That's also, washing your tools. If you have diseased material, removing that from your field, things like that. Biological control. The primary one here that you're going to be interested in is conservation biocontrol, which is attracting or preserving the good guys. So examples of tools in conservation biocontrol are replacing calendar-based pesticide applications. I hope none of you guys do that anyway, but with using pesticides in a threshold-based method. Or using pesticides that have a very narrow spectrum. Instead of using, pyrethrum, you might choose BT if you're having trouble with caterpillars. So don't kill the good guys, keep them around. Conservation biocontrol also includes encouraging biodiversity on your farm. So planting hedgerows, intercropping, just having diverse crops. Augmentation is basically if you add to native populations of biocontrol agents. Typically, this is most successful in greenhouses because if you release insects, if you buy insects, bring them in or release them outside, oftentimes they just fly away someplace else and you don't get the benefit of them. Classic biocontrol is not something that you're going to deal with because it's highly regulated. So don't worry about that. Mating disruption, An example, I put sterile males because it's just used in mosquito control. But you may be able to use pheromones depending on the usually in tree fruit, there's a few options. Um, Competitive exclusion, there's some biological fungicides that work this way where you apply the biological fungicide and it supposedly takes up sites on the plant that prevents pathogenic fungus from taking hold. Um, or competitive exclusion would be keeping your plants healthy, so weeds are less likely to take over, things like that. Mechanical and physical management. This includes physical removal, like going and hand picking caterpillars, which I'm sure you guys don't have time for. Maybe you've got kids who enjoy it, but uh, so that's, not the best option. Physical barriers is a better option. There's many pests that you can prevent by using floating row cover and applying that immediately after you plant your plants so the pests don't have access to it. Um, Physical removal can also include tillage. There's some soil-borne pests that you can really have a big impact on by tilling. So tilling isn't all bad. And finally, there's chemical control. I put at the top, read the label. You should never use any type of pesticide, whether it's organic or otherwise, before reading the label in its entirety. And that includes how to use it, how to apply it, when to reapply it, and things like the expiration date or how you should store that product. Particularly the organic pesticides can have a shorter shelf life because oftentimes they're based in natural substances. Um, Narrow spectrum is preferred. So if you can find a pesticide that targets the pest you're interested in, go for that as opposed to a broad spectrum pesticide. All this information is on the label. It will tell you what it will kill um, and what it won't kill. You'll want to target the application for chemical control. Timing, when the timing is recommended, not only for weather and the crop stage, and there's a pre-harvest interval usually, um, but also for when the life cycle is there of the pest that you're worried about. And they'll talk about the application method. You want to choose the least ecologically harmful. You have to think about things like water contamination, mammalian toxicity, so that's you or your pets or wild animals, the efficacy. I put that in there because you should understand how effective the product is going to be, because there's some things that are very expensive and are unlikely to do anything in the Pacific Northwest. They might work in different climates. So just make sure you understand that before you invest. Potential effects on other insects. The labels are all required to have sections on how they affect pollinators. So take a look at that. And then there's resistance management. This is when if you overuse a pesticide or an herbicide, fungicide, the organisms can develop a resistance to those. So that's why we say only use them when they're necessary. And if there's multiple different options, you might rotate between those. Okay, number 5 is the timing. So now that you know what the pest is, you can find out about its life cycle and you can target the most vulnerable stage. I already mentioned reading the label helps with understanding what the most effective life stage to target is. You can also use pest population modeling tools. These are a little bit more complex, but if you're interested, they're worth checking out. Here are 2 examples. Oops, I didn't change the title. I used to give the example of Ag WeatherNet and then the WSU decision aid system. And I took out the decision aid system because that's just for orchards. It's mostly targeted at the east side. And I think it costs like $300 a year. So it's most accessible to very large farms. Check it out if you're interested anyway. But the ones that are free are Ag WeatherNet. And and then the uspest.org, which is a website or resource out of Oregon, but it's also good in our area. For both of these, but well, for egg weather net, I'll start there. You can choose the weather station that is closest to you, and so when they're doing pest modeling, when they're using the pest modeling um, services that they have. They also have irrigation scheduling. The information is based on the weather station closest to you. You can also, if you have a certain type of weather station, which are easy to get now, you can actually download it onto this website and use the weather station on your farm. Um, for uspest.org, I find that they have a lot more degree day models, and degree day models are just a way to calculate when a certain life stage of an insect or a disease might occur. Um, it's just the amount of heat accumulation above a certain temperature when that allows the insects to develop. And so knowing what the heat accumulation in your area is will allow you to get models that can say, codling moth or apple maggot or something else will be hatching, within this short time period, or this is when you should target your spraying. So they're really interesting tools. I encourage you to check them out. This is just a picture of what Ag WeatherNet looks like, and these are all the weather stations in the state. I think I downloaded this last year, so there could be additional weather stations. These numbers are just what the temperatures are there at the time that I took this screenshot. But you can see over here, Ag WeatherNet has heat and chill information. They do have they do a lot of smoke stuff on this website as well. But they are starting to get some models for apples, blueberries, cherries, and things like that. They also have this irrigation scheduler that you could play with. Okay. Number 6 is after you have after you've applied your management tools, you need to assess how they worked. You should keep good notes about what steps you took and when, and then decide, are you happy with the result? And if you're not, then you go back to the flow chart, you reevaluate, you try some new tools, make sure you're getting the timing right, and you just go through the process again. So I wanted to give you a few examples. Here we go. Okay, so last season, your raspberries started falling on the ground inexplicably. Um, so this is a picture to the left. That's not normal, having your raspberries just hanging off there and dripping on the ground. In this case, you could pick them up and kind of, open them up and squish them and see what's in there. Over here, you can see this is a picture of, these are little fly maggots in there. So this, for me, I just open up the fruit and look in there to see what's in there. But this picture on the right shows kind of a salt water method bath that you can use that will just make the critters float to the top. The identification, this is a spotted wing Drosophila. These are a type of fruit fly that are causing, they appeared, I don't know, 15 years ago or so now, a little bit more than 15 years ago. And they look like regular fruit flies, but regular fruit flies go after fruit that's already ripe and starting to rot. These fruit flies lay their eggs in fruit before it's even harvested, before it's completely ripe. And so they're called the spotted wing Drosophila because the males have these spots on the wings. And they lay their eggs in the fruit. You can see the maggots here. Yeah. So after you get that identification, you can look on the Pacific Northwest Insect Management Handbook. And as I mentioned, these are laid out in a way that follows the integrated pest management information. So you can find a description of what the fly is, and the description of the actual insect, or the pest, yeah, the pest description, the symptoms of damage. Oftentimes they'll have nice photos, like these blueberries here. When this was first found in Western Oregon, they found it because workers on a blueberry farm were picking blueberries and they noticed that their hands were turning purple. And that shouldn't happen when you're picking blueberries. I mean, maybe a little bit, but this was kind of excessive. And so they noticed that there were little soft spots and little holes in the fruit. So that tipped them off. So symptoms of damage, life cycle, they give you information of how you might sample for them. And then they have the management methods. So they start off with cultural and physical methods, and they talk about those in detail. Um, they talk about biological control and chemical control. And then in this case, they give you further information. Um, Yeah, so this is, and in this case, the chemical control recommendations are kind of general. Oftentimes they'll have a list of, of the products that you might try. So for an economic threshold for the spotted winged Drosophila, if this is just for personal use and you like protein, then why not just keep eating them? For sale, there's an extremely low tolerance for these because the holes that the females make to lay their eggs are secondary entry for fungal diseases, and basically it causes the fruit to rot. So it's not just the maggot; it's that the fruit won't keep very well. Um, so yeah, so there's a pretty low tolerance. Here's a monitoring method that's described in the pest management handbook, and there's also some publications available on this from Oregon State University. Hanging vinegar traps, it tells you about the locations, checking them weekly. You can put a yellow sticky card in here, or you can just, the flies will be caught in the vinegar and you just look for the dark wing spot on some of them. Yeah, and then from the Pacific Northwest Management Handbook, here are the cultural controls. You want to make sure you pick your fruit frequently. Don't let it get overripe. Just pick up and dispose of all the overripe fruit. You can select thick-skinned cultivars. One thing that we were looking into really early on when this pest showed up is, there was a fear that this pest would just get completely out of control because it can infect strawberries early in the season, and then raspberries, and then blackberries, and it has a host all the way through the season, including all the wild blackberries. So if you have a bad enough problem, you might decide that you need to take out wild blackberries. I know you're laughing at me, but but that can be a hard thing. But anyway, there's just different levels of control. For chemical management, the chemicals only work on adults. Read the label to know whether the product is okay to use on your crop. You have to have proper timing, proper spray coverage. And so here's just some chemical options that are listed in these are organic options. There's also options that are not organic in the Pacific Northwest Handbook. I just use the organic ones as examples. Sometimes you'll have to do your own research to see exactly how effective these things are. Just because they're all listed, it doesn't necessarily mean they're all equally effective. For biological control, there hasn't been anything purposely released that we know of for the spotted winged Drosophila, but somebody in Washington found one of its natural enemies from its home range that's already here. So that's a good thing. Okay, here's another example. This is a local example. It's late July and the flea beetles are wiping out your fall and winter brassicas. And if you're vegetable farmers around here, you know that having the kale and cabbage and broccoli and all those things going into winter, that's your whole income for that time period. So you can see these yellow sticky cards are completely covered. You can see here that it's not just holes in there, but but this kale is turning brown, and that for flea beetles, when they cause damage, they just kind of scrape the surface of the plant. And so if they scrape enough, it makes holes. If they don't scrape enough, it still can cause the plant to desiccate and be unsaleable. So it's a pretty big deal. The economic threshold, in this case, since it's in the fall, it's your whole, fall income. Um, you would have a really low tolerance for this damage, and you have to deal with it now. Um, so the management options, think about what strategy you would use. I know you can't talk back, so I'll just say, if you look at the cultural and physical options, rotating your crops, too late for that. Floating row cover, too late for that. Using trap crops, it's too late for that. Managing brassica weeds, too late for that. It's too late to do any of these things because you're having a big problem right now. And so this would be a time when you would go to the chemical options just to knock back those populations. And this is exactly what the farmers that I've worked with have done. They've chosen things like usually pyrethrins, but pyrethrins, spinosad, neem oil, and then non-organic options. Um, there's options there you can use. I wanted to give some weed examples. So um, oftentimes people come to us and they say, well, my pasture is really thin and full of daisies. And in that case, oftentimes proper pasture management helps with that. You would get a soil test and you would almost always find that the pH is extremely low. And daisies, the oxeye daisies, they like growing in acidic soil. So that's kind of a sign of that. So you just need to apply pasture management techniques that will help the grass, the forage grow faster than the weeds. So that's so checking out your soil. Another example I ran into, it just happened to be a nursery where I worked. Canada thistle showed up in plants for a restoration project. Kind of embarrassing. Um, you don't want to be bringing noxious weeds. Well, I guess Canada thistle is a noxious weed. You don't want to be bringing a weed like Canada thistle into a native meadow restoration site. And so in that case, what happened was a neighbor next to our nursery had Canada thistle and the seeds blew into our greenhouse. And we were so busy, so slammed that, I know I kept looking at the thistles thinking we need to do something about that, and we didn't. Um, and we should have, because prevention was really the only thing we can do. It's worth going over to your neighbor and saying, hey, can we can we cut down these thistles for you? Because that ended up in a lost contract. So prevention was the key to that one. I ran into a situation once. I used to work in the noxious weed for the noxious weed control program in our county. And I ran into a site where poison hemlock showed up in this field in these nice swaths, exactly the width of the mower. And what had happened were these folks were using a mowing service. So this person was taking their mower and, mowing fields all throughout the area, and they weren't cleaning it in between. So clearly, somebody had poison hemlock, so they got a few seeds, and each time the mower came back and there was poison hemlock was already there, it went into seed. And each time they mowed it down while it was in seed, it just spread the seeds further in these swaths. So prevention, clean equipment, and managing your weeds before they go to seed. And then, of course, this is a common problem, annual weeds outgrowing your cash crop. And there's all sorts of weed management methods. I'm not going to go through all of them, but suffice to say, in the weed world, we say that 1 year of seeds equals 7 years of weeds. You're never going to be able to get away from weeds completely, but there's certain things you can do to lessen the problem. So check out, use different weed management methods, and particularly don't let things go to seed. As I mentioned earlier, integrated pest management can be used anywhere. If you have poultry and livestock, you can use the same steps: identify the pest, monitor the population, develop thresholds, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the same management tools are used: cultural, biological, mechanical, and chemical. So even though I used almost all examples that involve plants, you can also use integrated pest management for your livestock. So just to let you know, we do have an integrated pest management team throughout the state. It's kind of piecemeal. I'm part of this team, and I work with small farms and integrated pest management, but there's other specialists throughout the state with high value fruit and vegetable crops. We have a representative for urban integrated pest management. They work with the Master Gardener program. And then there's other specialists throughout the state. So yeah. If you're in Jefferson, Clallam, or Kitsap counties, well, anywhere you are, this regional small farms program is a really good resource. We have all sorts of events. Some of them are online, so you can attend them no matter where you are. We also have an online learning library. There's a number of classes that are recorded about different integrated pest management topics. So among other topics that you should check out. If you're in this Tri-County area, you can use this farmer technical assistance request. And if you have a question about integrated pest management, it comes to me. So anyway, this is just a good resource. And I think I didn't include my contact information. So that's all I have tonight for you, and I'm happy to take some questions.
All right, thank you, Laurel. And yeah, if folks have questions, you can put them in the chat. Laurel can answer them.
Yep, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen so I can see the chat box.
Nothing so far.
I wanted to mention we had you read the ATRA publication that was on integrated pest management, and I really liked that because it shows a lot of the beneficial insects that you may not recognize. But I did want to note that there are some remedies that they discuss in there that may or may not be particularly effective. Yeah. So just as a farmer, you get to experiment.
Well, I had a question for you, Laurel. Do you have examples of some of like the most damaging pests that you see in your work?
Uh-huh. Yeah. One of the reasons that I mean, prevention is the key, but the reason why I like hammer on not sharing equipment without knowing where you're getting it from is there's a couple of diseases that I that are particularly devastating. There's white rot that affects all alliums, and that will stay in your soil for 25 years without a host present. So I worked with a farmer a while ago who said, I found this problem 10 years ago, and I just decided to, I just planted my alliums in a different location. And then when it happened there, I planted them in another location, and then they never tried to get it diagnosed. Don't do that. Use your resources and get a diagnosis, because if you get something like white rot, there for organic agriculture, there's almost nothing you can do about it. The best thing you can do is prevent it. So it's worth it. If you find something weird on your farm, don't just throw it in the compost pile. Send it to me, send it to the lab, and we'll help you diagnose it, because you don't want to just make the problem worse, because the worse it gets, the harder it is to deal with. The other one is club root. That is also a soil-borne disease that can stay in the soil for, I don't think that one's quite as long as white rot, But since brassicas are one of the mainstays, well, I mean, alliums are too. Those are two huge crops around here. Clubroot is a little bit easier to manage because you can just adjust the soil pH. But both of those are hard to get rid of, and it's best just to not get them in the first place.
All right. Well, it's 6:55, so we're gonna switch to regional breakout rooms. But Laurel, there's a couple more questions in the chat if you
Yeah.
wanted to answer those while we
Yeah.
switch gears.
What are some of the dangers of getting commercial compost? You know, that's hard to say. Commercial compost, they usually treat that at pretty high temperatures. And so I'm not going to say you shouldn't get commercial compost. Some people worry about herbicides getting in compost, and the herbicides that used to be a problem in compost are not allowed for home use anymore. And so those would only be a problem if you're getting manure from a farm that didn't pay attention to the label that you can't use it if you're going to be selling manure off the farm. So I would say commercial compost is good. They treat it at a high temperature, and your recycling is good. Are there best practices for sharing or buying used equipment? I would just say make sure it's clean, get all the soil off of it. And if you can ask the farm where it's coming from, if they have any of these diseases like white rot or clubroot, just avoid those. But used equipment is great. Is it possible to test for a soil-borne disease? Nope. Nope. I mean, you can try doing a test planting. But the key is if you see symptoms of those disease, just pull the crop out immediately. And in some cases, you want to try to take a little bit of soil around the plant as well.
And Laurel, I'm going to interject. We
Yeah, you
don't
got to
have
cut off.
time to
Yeah,
answer
okay.
any more questions, unfortunately.
Okay.
But thank you
I can
so much.
answer. I can just put some answers in the chat box.
Okay, that'd be
Yeah.
great.
Okay, thanks.
Well, thank you for your presentation and your time tonight. And now we're going to switch to regional breakout rooms. So there's 4 different rooms to choose from. And we are going to talk about putting the questions in the chat. So what pests are you most concerned about? Which pests have you experienced on your farm or in your experiences? And are you using any integrated pest management methods just naturally? You might not have heard of IPM, but you might have recognized some of the methods in the presentation tonight. So Tessa is going to open those breakout rooms and you can choose which region that you belong in.
So you'll probably have to scroll down and you can click join and then yeah, the Northwest will stay in the main room. And if you are having trouble finding it or need to be moved to a room, just unmute and let us know or put it in the chat and we can move you to wherever you want to go. Yakima, okay. Willow, you're on the Olympic Peninsula, so
I just sent
okay.
Willow there.
Perfect.
And if you're in this room, hopefully you're here still for the Northwest discussion. And if you are hoping to go to a different room, yeah, please just either unmute and ask where you want to go or put in the chat and we'll send you there. And for those who are here in our Northwest group, so our questions that Claire posed are our first one, what pests are you most concerned about, and what pests have you experienced on your farm? Any folks want to share?
This is Larry, and one of the biggest ones we have is a plant. It's tansy.
Weed. Weed management. Tansy. Any others dealing with that issue? Got some nodding heads. Yep. How about others? What are you dealing with for challenges?
Yeah, we're dealing with aphids on our farm, and they've gone after multiple different crops. So just getting crafty with diatomaceous earth so far, but then also it rains and that comes off in most cases. So yeah, trial and errors.
Yeah, and Mrs. Smith sharing cabbage moths. Any others? I'll put my hand up for cabbage moths. That's a
We have
challenge.
the cabbage root maggot on our farm. And we do a two-part thing. One is we do not leave the roots in the soil. As soon as the crop is harvested, it gets pulled out and fed to our poultry, who eat all of the maggots. And then you can purchase cabbage collars, which are a physical barrier of the larvae, but you can also just buy fabric and make them yourselves. We buy a rayon wool mix because they're both a natural fabric that'll eventually degrade in soil colors, and just it's a great wintertime project to make a whole bunch for the next year. So that's one of our big pests in this area, and that's what we do for it.
That's an awesome tip. Make your own collars.
We have Canadian thistle in our pasture. This is kind of a nightmare. And we have powdery mildew in our, as well as cabbage moth in our, like, we have a truck garden. So those are our challenges.
Any other creative solutions, things that have been successful for people for managing pest problems or weed problems? Jen, how big is your thistle pasture problem?
I'm gonna keep my video off because my bandwidth is bad.
No problem.
So we have our pasture area is just probably about 3.5 acres, and it this year it took over like a fifth of it. So a lot. Yeah, and pasture management is our next frontier. I really haven't done a good job of it, and I like have this whole stack of books on my counter right next to my laptop right now. I just really want to tackle that this next year. Like that's the biggest thing that I want to do, and just start. Yeah, as inspired from last week's class, and I feel like there's so much we could do, even just step by step at really low cost, which is a real consideration. So. But anyway, yeah, but the thistle is it like came upon us fast and just proliferated before I really even had my wits about me, and then it was already flowering, or like thistling and sending its seeds everywhere. So
Yeah, like keeping close tabs on things going to seed, super important. And I've found for thistle management, that if it's possible, and it depends on your situation and how large of an area it is, right? But like mowing it pre-seed can be really helpful, or cutting it as close down to the ground as you can to get rid of it, rather than cutting, like, don't try and dig things that you're going to cut roots and then leave pieces of roots. But mowing it and exhausting that energy stored in the roots can be a really helpful method, but it's hard on scale.
yeah, that sounds smart. And what our next plan or next approach is, at a minimum, is just mowing it down in the spring as fast as we can before it becomes like it did this year. But yeah, thank you. Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got tips and other tips that floating row cover is really helpful. Definitely for like flea beetles. Have anybody had that? Has anyone had that experience using floating row cover? Has anybody tried it? It can be very helpful. You need to get it on right away, oftentimes. And then it can be really helpful, but it's another thing to manage. And making sure that you then keep an eye on what you've got growing underneath it, to pull it, or at least like let it expand so you've not got pressure on your plants growing up underneath it. But floating row cover can be very helpful. Yep, rust fly, yeah. Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of grasshoppers in our high tunnel, probably in like the spring to early summer. Um like right when our peppers and our tomatoes got transplanted in, it was just grasshopper mania. Um and yeah, we diatomaceous earth. They didn't really bother the tomatoes as much as the peppers. But I have no idea if this is actually was what helped a lot. One of our neighbors' chickens got into our hoop house, and I think she did a lot of the work for us. Um, but yeah, we just did diatomaceous earth. Um, and then once the pepper plants were able to, stave off having all their leaves eaten and got big enough, it just kind of the problem kind of resolved itself. But I do kind of think that chicken getting in there and us not finding her for a few days probably helped out a lot too.
That's awesome. And as long as it's early on, and not a food safety concern, having, it sounds like that was when the plants were real young. That sounds
Yeah,
super
yeah.
helpful. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, like once your plants get big enough, if at least for like transplant starts, if you can get them big enough and strong enough, oftentimes, you can outgrow the issues that you might be facing. And then like thinking back to that, what Laura was talking about on like the economic threshold, it might not be an issue if you can get your plants big enough and strong enough and past that stage. Any other IPM management techniques that people have tried or methods people have tried?
Well, I just want to say in favor of the chicken pest management approach, that we have chickens and ducks who do so much of our pasture pet management for us. It's crazy, and they're awesome, and especially our ducks. But the chickens too, and they break up the manure. We have cows, and they break up the manure and just like wipe out a lot of the fly and other pest population before they're even out of the larva stage. So I really appreciate, especially our ducks, and they also get the slugs. So they're great for the go. We don't have a slug problem at all. All of our neighbors do. We don't. So I'm gonna just give it up to the ducks. I think it's them.
That's great. Anybody have aphid solutions, things that have worked for you, going back to that first one you shared, Roderick? Aphids?
We had like pretty sizable aphid issues like early in the summer on a lot of like our kale, our broccoli, our broccolini, stuff like that. Um and we would diatomaceous earth, and we reached a point where it just was like we were just overrun, and it was all outdoors too. So it's like I thought like, okay, maybe we can get some ladybugs. I was like, well, we're outside, we'd also need to create like a little ladybug habitat. And it was
Support the
towards the end
beneficials.
of Yeah, yeah, it was towards the end of, like we were already harvesting broccoli and stuff like that, and um, so we kind of just were like, okay, like we just got a little got defeated. We reached a point
Yeah.
where it's just like it was too bad and just everything had to go into the chickens. But yeah, that's definitely our something that we are working on for this coming growing season is like getting ahead of that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing. Appreciate it.
All right. I know in my breakout room that I was in, I heard a lot of great methods, IPM methods, especially with livestock, which we didn't really get to cover in Laurel's presentation. So really great to hear all that. And if folks want to put in the chat just some of the pests that they've been dealing with or something interesting that they heard in their breakout room, feel free to do that. But now we are going to turn to our farmer speaker. We have Shay Homan here, and he is the orchard manager at Finn River, and he's going to be presenting tonight. So I'll let you take it away, Shay.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Shay. I am the orchard manager at Finn River Cidery, like Claire just said. And I put together a PowerPoint. So I'm going to just pull that up.
And I was gonna say, Shay, I forgot to, I think most people know what Finn River is, but for those who don't, they are a big cidery in Port Townsend, but I think you all sell nationally now. And
Yeah,
yeah,
not quite totally nationally, but
okay.
definitely in the western states.
But yeah, they make a fantastic product and they do a lot of community events as well.
Yeah. So yeah, here's a little picture of our orchard. It's on a beautiful winter day. Um, yeah, you just said a lot about us, but let's see. My I can switch like that. Yeah, so this is where we're located on the Northeast Olympic Peninsula. We're actually in Chimacum, just south of Port Townsend. And this is our orchard. So on the side, you can see we grow cider fruit, cider apples mostly, and pears on dwarf rootstock. And we have about 9 acres of fruit total. And then we also grow some other crops that we put in the cider, like hops. And underneath those hops, there's also some lavender. We also grow elderberries and a little bit of black currants and aronias. And we're exploring more of the berry crops that we can also put into the ciders because they'll quite likely do well on our farm. But just to get right into it, these are a lot of the pests that we deal with on our farm. So because we're primarily growing tree fruit, we're looking at tree fruit pests. And I kind of have them in categories here. So the primary pests are pests that are always a problem. If we don't manage them, they are they they'll destroy crops. We'll have crop failures guaranteed if we don't deal with these pests. Secondary are sometimes an issue, usually an issue in small outbreaks. And so we're always monitoring for them. And the third category is things that are rarely an issue, but they occasionally show themselves on the property, but are normally controlled just by natural enemies. But we're also monitoring for those because they could potentially break out into an issue, but aren't typically much of a concern for us. And that photo down there is fire blight, which is a major issue in a lot of places, but on our site has only happened once. But we still check for it. So the methods we use to manage pests in the orchard, monitoring. We use holistic orchard management practices, which I'll say a little bit more about what that means. And I'll talk about both of those two more in detail. We also use different cultural controls, like in the bottom corner, you can see just pruning is a cultural control, or burning is also a cultural control. And we also spray with organic pesticides when needed, out of an air blast sprayer to cover the trees. Tillage is also a control that we use. So how do we go about our monitoring? We use trapping. I'm gonna see if I can turn on my laser pointer. So we use traps to monitor pests. We use beat trays, which is like a frame with a sheet basically stretched over it, and you knock on the branch holding the tray underneath it. All the insects fall underneath, and you can count, what's living on the tree. It's a lot easier than checking individual leaves to find a little tiny fly or something. And just say, like, a huge part of monitoring is understanding the life cycle of a particular insect. So this is the Parasoftfly life history. This is the larval stage of a Parasoftfly, the one that causes the damage. And so knowing when to look, when would I be anticipating that there would be larvae out? When are they laying their eggs? Those kinds of things. And we also use degree day modeling to monitor, to basically the same thing, to know when to be looking for the insects, what we might anticipate seeing, when are their populations at their peak, when are they vulnerable to control. So a lot of like the soft pesticides that we use have really specific timings. If you were to spray it on them at the wrong part of their life cycle, it wouldn't do anything, or they might not even be there. So getting the timing right is the key. So I'll say a little bit more about degree day modeling because it's really important in orchard management. I haven't worked with it in other contexts, so I don't know what kind of models are out there for other kinds of pests, but it's really important in tree fruit. We currently use degree day modeling of codling moth, leaf roller, and parasilla. And you can calculate growing degree days by subtracting a base temperature from the average daily temperature. That's kind of the older way of doing it, and now a lot of that's done for you if you use something like AgWeatherNet. And I'm going to show you how I can do it through AgWeatherNet, or we also use the decision aid system, and that also calculates where we are as far as degree days for us. So when I go to AgWeatherNet, once you have your profile set up, I would select a report, and my report type is going to be degree days, and then I'll download something. And what you download looks something like this. So I'm looking at how many heat units are accumulated within a day, and then the accumulated heat units. And this is just going to tell me my max and my min. And so you can see this is starting in February, and there are no heat units accumulated. But when I get to July, so this is looking at July of 2024, and you can download this data off of AgWeatherNet for, several years. I don't know the full extent of the data, but you can look back too. But you can see on July 4th, I had 27 plus, and then a total of 1,170. And so those are the numbers that I'm looking at. And, at this time of year, we're having anywhere from like 20 to I've seen 40 in a day, 18. So it just depends on the weather. And so that's really important because you can't just say, oh, in July, that's when the pear softfly comes out. Well, that's generally true, but it's like, was it a hot July? Was it a cool July? And in warmer weather, those insects are gonna come out sooner, and also they may have more generations within a season. And so, because we're working with tree fruit, we use decision aid system, and we're actually really lucky. We have a ag WeatherNet weather station on our farm, so we have really good data for weather data. And there's a lot of them around, but definitely if I was looking at one like 10 miles away, microclimates can be really specific. But since we have a weather station, we definitely use their system, and we just kind of lucked out in that we have one. So, if I'm gonna pick a model, and these are all fruit specific. So, but these are the models that I'm looking at. So we've got our codling moth, and that's really the main one on this one that we're dealing with: a bleak banded leaf roller, Paracelia, and then they also have apple scab, fire blight, when you might predict outbreaks for those kind of fungal diseases too. So just to give you an insight to what it looks like inside of that system, it's telling me on this date, 2024, I had 1,468-degree days, and it's telling me where the moths are at in my orchard, and then this is potential controls. These are products that WSU has researched, and then like this is their effects on natural enemies. So I'm going to be looking at what is more of a broad spectrum. Like this one has a lot of red in it. It's going to have known harmful effects to more natural enemies to whatever pest to different types of pests that might be in the orchard. And then they give you these graphs, which they're really helpful. Sometimes it takes a bit of interpretation, but this is indispensable for management. So to get into our holistic orchard management practices, basically when we're looking at this, we're thinking about nutrition of the plant. This is very preventative. We're thinking about stimulating the health of a plant so that it has a strong immune system. We're thinking about competitive colonization for things like bacterial and fungal diseases so that we're inoculating beneficial microbes to be occupying the habitat so that the plants would be less vulnerable to harmful microbes, pests, and I'm a big fan of compost, so I'm going to show you guys a picture of my compost pile. This is the early stage. We make lots of compost, and while that's used for adding nutrients back into the system, it's also introducing biology into the soil. And so if we're thinking about starting with the health of the plant with soil health, compost is a big part of that system. We're also making compost teas, and we might be purchasing inoculants. We might have to use purchase inoculants at certain times versus our own compost teas based on organic standards. So as much as I would like to spray my compost tea all the time, it's not always possible because there's only so many days before harvest that I can spray that. Making teas, herbal teas, fermented teas, and we're spraying them on foliar, spraying them to the soil for competitive colonization like I was talking about. And then we are focusing on, fertility through soil testing, and we'll use some organic fertilizers if we need to. We mostly do foliar fertilizers, cover cropping, and compost and mulch. But sometimes we do need to supplement with some ground applied fertilizer. And I would just say, yeah, an ounce of prevention. I mean, that's a good place to start from once you understand what you've got going on. So yeah, these are some different pests. This is the pear sawfly again. This is also called the pear slug. This is apple scab. And then for us, just pasture grass is kind of a big deal because it was a cow pasture. The orchard was a cow pasture for like 100 years before it was an orchard. So, and the trees don't like to grow in the thick grass. So this is that same slide again, showing our major pests. So I've got a slide to talk about each of these more specifically, how we target these codling moth, apple anthracnose, and pasture grass. And if anybody had any questions about these, I'd be happy to talk about it, but I won't go into any of these other ones in much detail. So codling moth, we set one of these traps. These are called delta traps, and the red color is attractive to moths. Like red apples have been known to attract more pests than green or yellow apples. So having these red traps, and then inside of it is a pheromone lure, and this is a sticky card. And then this is a close-up of a codling moth on the sticky card. And so we've got one of these traps every 2.5 acres, and they're checked and cleaned every week, and we record how many moths were not found. And then we're comparing that with the degree day models that I was showing you from AgWeatherNet or Decision Aid System. And our cultural control for codling moth is, orchard sanitation. Basically trying not to let too much fruit rot on the ground, as much as possible. We're trying to clean all that up. In addition to that, our softer control is to put out more of these pheromone lures. They look different like this, but it's essentially this. We use the same strength as would be there. And we put out, 300 to 400 per acre, which is like 3,000 to 4,000 of these little lures hung on all the trees in the orchard. And those essentially create a cloud of the mating pheromones attracting I believe it's the pheromone of the female codling moth, so that all the males just have a harder time finding females to mate with. It doesn't prevent it, but it just confuses them, slows them down. They use more of their energy up. They can mate fewer times. And then in addition to that, we're gonna spray on topical ovicide, which is basically just an oil, like a light oil that won't smother the plant, but will just create a slight coating over the eggs and prevent them from hatching. And then just based on our trap counts, we'll decide whether we need to use biological insecticides, usually viral or bacteria-based insecticides that target the pest, and knowing that they're going to be there when you spray them, because they're usually are only susceptible to that in their larval stage, and they're only exposed in their larval stage for about 3 days. So they both the insecticides have a short window. They break down in UV, so they're only persistent on the plant for a few days. So the timing on those is really specific. You have basically no wiggle room with that one. So that's where using your models is really important. So this is apple anthracnose, which is a fungal disease. Here's a picture of it from WSU's website. It first creates these kind of dark patches on the tree that then kind of rot, and they rot straight down to the heartwood. And this whole section here is what we're looking at. It's really damaging to apple trees. It's mostly just a problem in like Western British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. And yeah, it's pretty damaging. So what we're doing is we're using our cultural controls, pruning them, or cutting out canker specifically on the tree sometimes, or pruning out whole limbs. And then we're going to burn those so that we're not leaving them in the orchard as much as possible to then spread, because from each canker, the fungus, it lives there and then it creates its reproductive parts on there and spreads by wind. Um, so getting those out of there and burning them. And then we turn all this into biochar. Once it's completely burned down, this is water coming out. We'll quench it, and then that all goes back into our compost. But then again, we often may need to use a chemical control in addition. And basically, for our system, the only thing that's allowable and effective is copper, or Bordeaux paste, which is a blend of copper and lime. And then grass. Grass is a problem if you don't stay on top of it for apple trees, especially when they're young. Once they're mature, they can, they can compete on their own. So this is one situation on the right, and this is another situation on the left. This is kind of like, how do we get from this to this? This has been our method to share it with you all. This is not a good situation. We've got some cover crop in the middle. It's a good start. So starting with this, we're mowing everything down, and then we're putting landscape fabric over the top of that. We've got our cover crops down the middle. Pretty hard for us to do cover crops underneath the trees, so we've got landscape fabric under there. And then we're pulling up that landscape fabric after it kills the weeds. We can't leave it down over the winter time because it's just great habitat for voles to come in and eat our apple trees. So we lift it up in the fall, put down wood chips to suppress any remaining grass and to feed the trees, and then keep, till in that cover crop and reseed a cover crop down the center, and do that for a handful of years. And then we turn this back over into grass, kind of move on from this area. These guys over here definitely help us out, but we do a lot of that work just with a tractor and a rototiller. And I wish we could do it all with Jim and John, but they only come to visit sometimes. And then we also have another tool that I'll show where you can actually till under the trees here. That's an in-row power harrow, and that's really great. But also on young trees, it can potentially damage them as it moves around them. So that's why in these younger areas, we like to use the fabric and the wood chips. Help build up that fungal population in the soil for the fruit trees without tilling as much as we can. But then sometimes we do use this tool, which works really well on mature trees as well for suppressing the grass. And I think that's pretty much what I've got as far as our RPM practices in the orchard. That's a pretty good summary. So I can take any questions if anybody has anything. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, it looks like we do have some questions. This person is curious about what you do to manage wasps in the orchard.
Yeah, I do have wasps on there. I mean, wasps are actually beneficial in the orchard, but I'm gonna exit out of this here. Maybe I can see you guys. Yeah, so they're a beneficial insect. They're a predatory insect. There you are. But it's a problem. We've had people on our crew that are allergic to wasps, and we get really big nests in the trees. It's really great habitat for them, and we end up having to remove them. And I just manually remove them. So I put on my bee suit, because I'm also a beekeeper, and I go out there and I put a trash bag over the whole nest, and I just cut it out, and I tie it, and I just kill them like that. And I don't mess with them if they're in the hedgerows or anything, but if they're in the orchard, they're a hazard to my team, and I
Yeah.
have to remove them. And ground nests are really challenging. I had a really hard time getting rid of ground nests. So I've tried the hot soapy water with essential oils. I've tried putting stuff over the holes, and it just depends on how strong they are.
Okay. And then how often and how much topical ovicides do you use in the season?
We will do, it's a really good question. We may do, how many applications do we do? This year we just used it. There's 2 generations of codling moth, and we're pretty much just using that for codling moth right now. But we only used the oil in the first generation this season. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember without checking my records how many times we applied. Yeah, sorry.
No worries. And are there any ages of trees that are more susceptible to pests and diseases?
Definitely young trees are the most susceptible. So that's when you really need to be on top of any pest issues, because like within the first 10 years, if your tree gets a bad outbreak of something, it will potentially ruin it for the rest of its life, or maybe not ruin it, but kind of runt it out. So you really want to make sure your trees get off to a good start. That's when, like, if your tree gets anthracnose early on, you can totally decimate it. Whereas if you have a mature tree with anthracnose, it's hardly going to kill the tree. It's more a risk of spreading to other trees. It might kill a limb, but when it's young, it can be totally deadly. And even a pest like the pear sawfly that I talked about, it can defoliate a tree, and if it defoliates a young tree, that can be really damaging to that tree for the rest of its life.
Okay, so it's about like giving the trees as much of a good start to life as you possibly can to make sure they're strong enough to survive what comes at them later.
Yeah, especially like I was saying with the grass too, it's a major issue with the grass. It'll do the same thing. It can totally choke out a young tree, whereas a mature tree, can grow just fine.
Um, and then let's see, someone was wondering if you could tell them about other orchard techniques that may not apply to pests. So maybe orchard techniques that, um, I mean, you talked a bit about improving the fertility, on the farm. So I imagine that helps with IPM and also with things like yield.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole nother thing, but like pruning, there's a whole art and science to pruning. Uh, and that's really what got me into wanting to do work with trees, is I've just always loved pruning trees, and I've done a lot of tree pruning. And it's definitely an art and a science that you can really nerd out on. You can go deep for years and years. Like I can say after doing it for, I don't know, more than 15 years of tree pruning, like I'm still learning new things.
And does pruning help with managing diseases and pests as well? Are there
You're
pruning
definitely pruning out diseases. Yeah, if
Oh,
you see disease, you can cut it out, and that's kind of your number one way to just totally take care of it.
okay.
But when it gets beyond what you can prune out, that's when you kind of have to look at what else you can do.
All right. And do you ever remove trees if the cankers have spread too much? And if so, what's the threshold for that?
That's a really good question. And I have removed many, many trees. We have, you know, if our orchard is fully stocked, we had at our peak about 6,500 trees. Um, I have taken out entire rows of trees because we also grow like around 30 different varieties, and I found that certain varieties are more susceptible than other varieties. And so I've pulled entire rows or cut them down and regrafted them to other varieties to try and find things that are more more resilient and less susceptible. Because I would ultimately, there's some, fruit that's just really good and you want to grow it, but at a certain point, it's not worth it. And got to try a different variety. And also, if they're spreading to other trees, a tree might just be too far gone. And how do you know when it's too far gone? That's a good question. And we're often wondering, are we there? Because with so many trees, some of them get to that point, and it's hard to know. There isn't really a hard, fast rule, but I would say, like, if it has it on every single branch on the entire tree and the trunk from top to bottom, definitely got to go. If it's got it just on the branches and not on the trunk, then I'm going to cut out all of that and leave the trunk, which is pretty extreme. But you can, with anthracnose, you can actually just remove the individual canker, not the whole limb. It's just a lot more work. So then you look at removing individual cankers, treating them individually with copper, and just. But if you have thousands of trees, thousands of cankers, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, it adds up.
It
Um,
does.
So is this disease something that has escalated? You said you've been working with in orchards for over 15 years. So is it becoming a bigger problem?
I don't think it's becoming a bigger problem. I can't go back, but as long as I've worked with fruit trees, like it's been a problem. I think it's a big part of the reason why fruit growing moved mostly east of the mountains is
Oh,
fungal
okay.
diseases. I wasn't around in the early 1900s, late 1800s when they were growing a lot of fruit on the west side. Definitely drier climates are better. So if you live in a part of the state that's like a microclimate that would be more favorable, then you're gonna see it less. But it's a well documented issue that goes back at least a ways. I actually don't know when it was first documented. And the word anthracnose is just kind of refers to like necrosis on the plant. Like all different plants get anthracnose. People wonder about like the type of anthracnose you get on a certain vegetable. It's totally unrelated to apple anthracnose. It's caused by a different organism, but the name just basically describes the condition.
Okay. And then this person wants to know how you prevent worms or apple maggots in your apples.
Luckily, we don't have a big problem with apple maggot. A lot of people use sticky traps to catch apple maggot. And I don't know if it has something to do with our management because I did grow one test tree of a variety that I was interested in this year, and it was full of apple maggot. I don't know of any other trees we have with apple maggot. So I was like, that was all the way on one side of the property. Did it come in from one side? Am I going to see it more? But we don't have a problem with apple maggot, but we also harvest almost all of our fruit. Inevitably, there are some drops, some early things that drop or they get bird damage, they fall into the ground. And so there is a little bit of that, but we try and do a really good job of picking all of our fruit. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I realized I had accidentally skipped a question. Someone asked, have you thought about using sheep to eat the grass in the orchard? Shropshires are known for not eating the trees.
That's really interesting. I don't know anything about that breed. We did used to have sheep, and long ago I lived on another farm where we had sheep in the orchard. It was just a small orchard of like 7 or 8 fruit trees that were mature semi-dwarfs, and they were Katahdin sheep, and they would eat the trees, including the bark. Um, yeah, that's interesting about that breed. A big issue we have is if most of our trees are currently dwarf trees, and which means their branches are lower to the ground than a semi-dwarf or a standard apple tree. And I think that if you put a leaf in a sheep's face, it's going to eat it. And so, but if you could grow a higher orchard with more of a canopy, I think that's a great idea. We had geese. We used to have like 100 geese. They really didn't keep up with the grass. Well, they did eat it, but it was really patchy. They'd really eat all around their kind of main feeding area, but they wouldn't do the other areas, as well as like electric fencing. All our trees are trellised. So we have these metal trellises. So you're limited in the way you set up your electric fences, and you have to go all the way down the row. And so, like, are you making small paddocks, large paddocks? You're trying to do small paddocks to really get them to eat things down. They end up with these long, skinny paddocks, and you kind of have them, you can't go below a certain size. So there's some challenges. I would love to try something. I've been thinking about like dwarf pigs, like coonies. Get some grazing pigs under there. I don't know, maybe it's kind of a far-fetched idea, but they're small enough. I don't know how much damage they'd do.
Yeah. Well, cool. Maybe someday we'll go to Finn River and there'll be pigs running through the trees.
I think it would be fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
All right. It doesn't look like we have any other questions. So thank you so much, Shay, for your presentation. That was great.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yeah. All right, so next we are going to cover homework for next week. So next week's topics or topic for the whole farm plan is resource evaluation and enterprise assessment. So we're going to be evaluating personal resources, analyzing the suitability of an enterprise goal, examining the requirements of different crop and livestock production systems. And you're going to learn how to determine whether a product or service can be reasonably produced with the resources that you have. And the homework, like the reading for next week, is an ATRA NCAT document. So same organization that made the reading for this week. And that document is called Evaluating a Farming Enterprise. And then we also have a few announcements. So we have some classes coming up. October 21st, there's a Cultivating Coexistence Farming for Salmon Health class. And that is in Belfair, which is in Mason County, but that can be close for some of our Kitsap and Pierce. Oh, yeah, some of our Pierce people as well. And that's from 4 to 6 p.m. So that's Farming for Salmon Health. And then just bigger events coming up. November 5th is Focus on Farming Conference in Monroe. I know we've announced all this already, but just reminding people, we have Tilth Conference as well. That's November 12th through 14th. And that is in Spokane, Washington. And then also, I heard about this event last week. It's a biochar demonstration and workshop. That's at Roots Farm here in Paulsbo. And that's November 13th from 10 to 2 p.m. And that will, along with all these other events that I've just talked about, that will be posted on like the homepage, the field trip page on the whole farm planning website. So yeah. Thank you so much, everyone. We're going to, looks like, end class a little bit early unless we have any other announcements. Doesn't look like it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. And Shay, I don't know if you're still in the room, but your volume was good.
Nice, Claire. Thank you.
Yeah,
You left so quick. That was great.
I know.
And thanks, Ever.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And Kate, I emailed you the link to that class.
Biochar. Perfect.
Yep.
I'll post it tomorrow.
Awesome. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everybody.